Today is October 2nd, 2020, and you're watching Horseshoe Politics. All of you guys watching this, you have probably heard by now, it was really big on the news today. Donald Trump, as well as his wife, Melania Trump, both of them just tested positive for COVID-19 last night. He in fact announced in a tweet last night that was sent at 12:54 a.m. Eastern Time and 9:54 p.m. Pacific Time that, quote, "Tonight, Flotus and I tested positive for COVID-19. We will begin our quarantine and recovery process immediately. We will get through this together." Earlier that day, just earlier yesterday, because yesterday night is when this announcement was made by Trump himself, but earlier that day, all over the news, they were talking about whether or not Trump might have gotten COVID-19 because of the fact that his close aide, Hope Hicks, had tested positive just hours earlier. So a lot of people were thinking that Trump likely had COVID-19 already before he actually got the test back that said he had it. A lot of people already thought that he might have had COVID-19 by then. In fact, last night, just a couple hours before the tweet I just talked about, he sent another tweet. He sent a different tweet where he said, quote, "Hope Hicks, who has been working so hard without even taking a small break, has just tested positive for COVID-19. Terrible. The First Lady and I are waiting for our test results. In the meantime, we will begin our quarantine process." So just last night, Donald Trump and Melania Trump were already beginning to quarantine because they were unsure whether or not they had COVID-19. But because of the fact that they had come into close contact with Hope Hicks, it was pretty likely already that both Donald Trump and Melania Trump had the virus. They weren't 100% sure yet, but because he and Melania had gotten into close contact with Hope Hicks, who had been confirmed to have the virus, they preemptively started the quarantine process to be safe. Well, as it turned out, a couple hours later, they in fact had tested positive. Both of the Trumps had tested positive for COVID-19. First of all, I would like to mention that it's currently not known, and it might never be known for that matter, whether or not Hope Hicks originally had the virus and gave it to Melania and Donald Trump, or whether one of the Trumps had the virus originally and one of them gave it to Hope Hicks. It might never be known who had the virus first, but what we do know is that Hope Hicks got tested first, and because of that positive test, Donald Trump and Melania Trump realized that they needed to quarantine because they both came into close contact with her, and as a result, they likely also could have had the virus. And as it turned out, they both had the virus. So they started the quarantine process preemptively right before their test actually came back, just in case they had tested positive. Now that I've basically gone over what actually happened between Donald Trump, Melania Trump, and Hope Hicks, I first want to talk about my reaction to when I first found out about this, and then I want to talk about the implications of this on the presidential election that's coming up, and the implications of it as a whole. So this announcement was actually made right after I uploaded my video last night. Last night, I made a video talking about Trump's narrow path to victory, where basically I talked about why Trump does not have a good chance of winning the 2020 presidential election, and then I talked about what all Trump needed to do from here on out if he still wanted to win the presidential election. Right after I upload that video, just minutes after I upload that video, the news comes out that both Trumps, Donald and Melania Trump, both of them tested positive for COVID-19. So if that news had come out just a few minutes earlier, or maybe an hour earlier, I probably would have done that video completely differently, because that news actually changes up a whole lot for the upcoming presidential election. The actual implications of Donald Trump testing positive for COVID-19, that's what we will be talking about in this video. But before we get to that, I first want to talk about why I waited for over 12 hours before making this video. I originally was going to upload this video early morning today, like 6 to 7 a.m. Originally, I was planning on doing it last night at like 1 a.m. right after I found out the news. But I wanted to wait a bit. I decided that it was a better idea to wait a bit and find out more about the situation instead of making a video right after the event took place. Like, at first I just found out that he tested positive, but I didn't really know many of the specifics. But now, after looking at the news for many hours, I now have a much better idea of what all is going on. So early morning, he originally started reporting symptoms of COVID-19. Originally, it was just really minor symptoms, really mild symptoms, but throughout the day, they've gotten a bit worse. Where I live in Texas, it's about to be 8 p.m. And the most recent news that I've heard on the situation is that just a few hours ago, Donald Trump took a helicopter in order to go to the Walter Reed Medical Center where he'll be hospitalized in order to get treated for COVID 19. Now, the thing about Donald Trump is that one, he is 74 years old, meaning that he is relatively old, and two, he is around 250 pounds, which means that he's also relatively overweight. Both of those characteristics, being old and being overweight, both of those characteristics puts a person at being at a higher risk of getting severely affected by COVID-19 compared to the average person. So this is not really good news for Trump. And these specific characteristics about Trump, his age and his weight, that's why there's such a big concern for him because of his age and his weight. That's why a lot of people are worried about how badly this virus will affect him. There have been some reports that Trump has previously had heart problems, but there hasn't really been much substantial evidence to fully back up that claim, so that may or may not also make Trump have a higher risk of getting severely affected by this virus. But even forgetting about any potential heart disease, he is still old and he is still relatively overweight. Both of those characteristics will definitely work against him during his recovery process. And because he is both relatively old, and relatively overweight, he has quite a bit higher of a chance of passing away compared to the average person. Now, this is not something that many people might feel comfortable with. It's perfectly understandable why, but there is a chance that Trump might pass away from this virus. I really hope he does not. I would like that no person in the world dies from this virus. This virus is a terrible thing I wish nobody had to suffer through, but unfortunately, it has already claimed the lives of thousands across the world, and until we have a vaccine that can effectively put this virus in its tracks, there's the best thing we can do is just to implement as many social distancing measures as possible in order to minimize the spread of the virus, as well as make better treatments for the virus to minimize the risk that they pose to people. But until we have a vaccine in place, there's no way to completely put an end to this pandemic. So unfortunately, it has taken the lives of thousands across the world. I really hope Trump is not one of these people, but we still have to talk about the chance that that does happen. For people around his age range, there's not really a set percent chance of people in his age range passing away. We don't know that much about this virus, so it's not really confirmed like the exact death rate for people in different age ranges. But a lot of the studies show that for people in their 70s, people ages like 70 to 79, the general consensus is that people in that age range they have around a 6 to 8% chance of passing away from this virus. That's around the percentage chance that a person in that age range who contracts COVID-19 has of passing away, which is not that high of a death rate, but that's still really big deal, and that's why we've had to do so much to try to stop the spread of this virus. 6 to 8%. If I was told that I had a 6 to 8% chance of dying, I would be really scared. I would be scared as hell for my life. And I completely understand why we've had to do so much to try to stop the spread of this virus. But the other thing about Trump is that he is overweight, and many studies have shown that being overweight puts you at a higher risk of being severely affected or even killed by COVID 19. So this is not really good news for Trump. So for Trump, that means he has an even higher than just normal 6 to 8% chance of someone in his age range. He has an even higher chance of getting killed by this virus. But there's no way to know for sure what will happen to him. Because he is the president, I would assume he would have access to the highest standards of medical care across the country. So I guess I would say that for Trump, his chance of actually dying from this virus would be quite a bit lower than the average American would have of dying from this virus, which would make sense because when you're in a position of that much importance, you're going to have access to the best possible medical care. But there's still the chance that Trump does pass away from this virus, and we have to talk about the different possibilities. One possibility is that Trump recovers fine and he just has to go through like a 2 week quarantine period. Two, Trump survives but he's seriously affected by the virus. And three, Trump passes away from the virus. Let's talk about the most morbid possible outcome. Trump passes away from the virus. If Trump passes away from the virus, the RNC, they have to nominate someone new at the top of their ticket. The most likely person for this position would be Mike Pence because he's already serving as vice president. So it would be a quick and easy transition to just put him from being vice president to being president. So then the election would essentially be Joe Biden versus Mike Pence. The second option is that Donald Trump survives but is seriously ill from the virus. What that would mean is that one, he cannot campaign for the rest of the election cycle. Two, he cannot debate for the rest of the election cycle. Three, he's going to have a really hard time of winning this election if he's not able to do any major campaign events, and if he's forced to quarantine for the rest of this election cycle, sorry, because the election is only 1 month away. The doctors have said that whenever you get the virus, you should quarantine for at least 2 weeks. But if you are getting severely affected by the virus, you're gonna need to quarantine for more than 2 weeks because it's gonna take longer for you to beat the virus. So for Trump, it might take longer than just 2 weeks for him to beat the virus, which means that he might have to miss both of the upcoming presidential debates. He almost has to certainly miss the next presidential debate because that's just under 2 weeks from now, which would fall within the 2 week window that he's supposed to quarantine for. So that almost surely is out the window for Trump. But the other debate he might also have to miss if he gets severely affected by COVID, because then it'll take him more than 2 weeks to battle the virus. What this means is that one of Trump's only chances of making a comeback, which was crushing Biden in the debates, this is exactly what I talked about yesterday. One of the things that Trump would have needed to do was crush Biden in the debates in order to make a comeback in the polls. That is essentially out the window for Trump now as a possibility because he can't really debate when he's supposed to be quarantining. And the other thing is, Trump cannot do any more rallies. Now that he has the virus, he has to quarantine for at least 2 weeks, if not longer, which means that he's not able to hold any more rallies likely until the election. And I would say that the rallies were actually one of his biggest strengths in 2016, and they might have been one of his biggest strengths now, despite the fact that it's lot less safe to hold rallies now than in the past because obviously COVID. Trump was still holding many of these rallies ever since the summer. The first one he held was in Tulsa, Oklahoma on June 20th, and ever since then, he's held many rallies throughout the country, mostly in swing states. But that was one of his strengths because it was really able to drive excitement into his base, and he was able to do a good job of getting his base to turn out on election day to vote for him. That was one of his biggest strengths overall, his base. But I talked about yesterday, that strength might have just turned to his weakness because if you only have your base voting for you but no one else, you're not going to win the election. But Trump cannot hold these rallies anymore because one, he has to quarantine, and two, it's going to look really bad for him if he already caught the virus but he still holds these rallies despite being personally affected by the virus. So Trump likely won't be able to hold many rallies at all, if any at all, until election day. So two of his biggest strengths, I would say, rallies and debates, both are essentially out the window for Trump. What can Trump really do from here on out if he still wants to win this election? Honestly, there's not too much. I am almost willing to call it game, set, and match for Biden, although I don't want to do it yet because with Trump, you never know. But Biden, I would say, has a 90% chance of winning. I really hope I don't regret these words a month from now. Biden has at least a 90% chance of winning this election because now that Trump has COVID, he can't go on the campaign trail anymore. He has to sit in quarantine for at least 2 weeks now, if not longer, which means that many of the things he was previously planning on doing in order to campaign for this election, he cannot do anymore. He's stuck quarantining for 2+ weeks. So Biden has a really good chance of winning this election now. There's a slight chance that Trump somehow makes a comeback. Maybe if Trump is eventually able to beat COVID-19, maybe he gets a bump in the polls because people feel inspired by Trump and his battle against COVID. Or maybe they feel sympathy towards him for getting COVID, and maybe that helps him bid in the polls. But even then, I don't think that's enough to overcome his several point deficit in the polls against Biden. Well, for now, I guess this is all I have to say on the issue, but I am definitely going to make another video on the issue, whether it's tomorrow or a couple days from now, because this is a really big deal. The United States has consistently been the number one country in terms of number of COVID cases and COVID deaths, so it's pretty big deal the fact that the president of that country got COVID after around 8 months of the pandemic. But that is all I have to say in this video. I'm definitely going to make more videos on this issue. And I just want to say, I hope that Donald Trump and Melania Trump make a speedy recovery from this virus and get better by November 3rd. But we just have to wait and see what happens. I hope that I was able to give some good insight on the situation, and I hope you continue to watch my upcoming videos. Thank you.